Hello and welcome back to another episode of This Round is on Me. So, as you may know, I run a culinary event space called Magazine Street Kitchen, and recently we had chef Alistair Leithorn, who is originally from Nagaland, but now based in Goa, cooking up a rustic Naga-inspired meal for us at the kitchen. I had never tasted Naga food before, but suffice to say, while yes, it is very meat-forward, it's also very comforting. The region is also home to one of the world's hottest chilies called Bhoot Jhalokia, which is indigenous to that region and renowned for bringing people to tears. But I highly recommend taking the opportunity to try this cuisine if you ever come across it anywhere. Speaking of spicy and spices, my guest today is Sana Javeri Kadri, who was born and raised in Mumbai, in India, and currently lives in Oakland, California. As a third-generation Mumbaikar, Sana wanted to bring better flavors of home, and a taste of her culture to people's kitchens. 5 years later, DiaspораCo is growing and thriving as a company and puts money, equity, and power into the best regenerative spice farms across South Asia and brings wildly delicious flavors to the US and beyond. Join us after a quick break as we dive deeper into Sana's mysterious spice trail. Hey, Sana, welcome to the show. It's great to finally have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Hello.
Well, so for those of you listening, Sana is in sunny or maybe not so sunny Oakland right now in California. And I am, of course, in Mumbai. So yes, if you fall asleep in the middle, Sana, I forgive you because it's very early in the morning. But thank you for making the time to be here. And I'm so excited to have you because I've been wanting to, I've obviously been following everything you've been doing with Diaspora. First of all, congratulations
You've known me since I was a kid. So
I know.
I feel like you've been following since I was a chintu.
Yeah. But, what you've done with Diaspora is something completely different and so exciting. And congratulations on 5 years. I saw all the amazing celebrations you were doing. And wow, I did not realize it has been 5 years already. But
I did, but it's only because of how long they were.
Well, we're going to hear all about that and more. But before anything else, I found it very interesting that you mentioned you worked in a Hasidic Jewish restaurant and you quit college halfway and took a break, and then you spent most of your time cold calling people. I'm going to get into all of this and more. Okay. But take us through it. So, you're a Bombay girl, grew up here, and then what happened when you left?
What happened, basically? So I am a Bombay girl, proper South Bombay girl. And I was at Ambani for my last 4 years of school and got there and was pretty miserable. Like, I just didn't fit in. I think I am a gentle, sensitive, relatively, at least at that time, simple kid. And Ambani was like way too snazzy and fancy and politicky and high profile for me. And within a year and a half, I was pretty miserable. I was very much the bullied kid. Lots of drama went down at age 13 and 14 where mom and dad were sort of like, do you want to just not go? Like, do you want to just sit at home? Would you be happier? Would you be safer? Would you be okay? Like, shout out to my teachers, were very nice to me. So I took my IGCSE exams from home, sitting at home, studying myself. So like very different. And I think that that meant that my 10th standard was me sitting with textbooks at home, thinking about who do I want to be when I grow up? What am I curious about? With no friends and nobody my age to really talk to, except for the adults that mom and dad would invite over. So they were really desperate to invite people over so that this girl would get, some stimulation in life. And actually, I think that turned out to be a very transformational year because it's the year I started photographing and I taught myself how to photograph. I started working in dark rooms. I realized that I was interested in food and maybe agriculture. Like, I remember telling my mom that, Ma, I want to go to Navasheva, the wholesale market. And I want to understand, which South Bombay Nepean Road girl wants to go to Navasheva. And I want to understand where our bhindi comes from because bhindi was my favorite food. And she was like, can you not? Like, that sounds a bit much. And she was like, how are you going to logistically do that? You're 14 years old. From there, I was very lucky in that I was able to get a scholarship to go to UWC in Italy, which is the United World Colleges, this magical experiment 200 people, 100 different countries. There, I started working on the on-campus farm. So the interest in agriculture was piqued. From there, I went to college in California, chose a very small liberal arts college over University of California, Berkeley. And I think, across the board, I just have to applaud my parents. Like, I was not a dream child. I was pretty difficult, angsty, had gotten into some serious trouble type kid. I certainly wasn't getting A pluses. And they just gave me so much independence and freedom to say, go be who you want to be.
That's amazing. I mean, I have to say, as a parent myself, I do applaud your parents as well. And I know them and, I mean, as somewhat, we're both the same age and, whatever, 20 years ago, that was just not the done thing, right? Or more than that, 25 years ago, even homeschooling, which is essentially what you did before it became a COVID trend in a way, is amazing. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think to fast forward to that Hasidic Jewish restaurant in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, I mean, I would gone through 2 years of college, and every day, I'd call mom and be like, I know it's such a privilege to be here. I know it's such an expensive college, but I'm not happy. And she would sort of be like, just appreciate the privilege and keep moving. But I felt like I wanted to be understanding the food industry in real life. And living on a really idyllic campus in suburban California wasn't really doing that for me. So I made a case for them. I was like, I'll spend 3 months in Mumbai and then I'll spend 9 months in New York. I was very lucky that I had a green card by then, so I could just go to New York. And they were like, sure, you do that, but we're not supporting you. Like, sure. That'll be, and that wasn't them cutting me off. That was saying, you want to do this thing, figure out how to make money. Like, go get a real job then. And I mean, of course, I would have had such a safety net if I needed it. It was not, some very brave venturing out into the wild. But I started volunteering at an urban farm, but obviously that was like deeply unpaid. And my rent was this princely sum of $800 a month that I had no idea how I was going to conjure up. And so I showed up at the closest restaurant in my neighborhood, not understanding that it was a Hasidic Jewish restaurant, not understanding that like I would be, I think, the first non-Jewish like staff member they'd ever hired.
Not just non-Jewish, but brown.
But brown and Indian. And I think I lasted there. I will say the tips were amazing. I was 18 or 19 and making a solid like $250 a night in tips.
What?
Yeah, I was killing it. Like because it was the only nice restaurant in that neighborhood. And Clara, the boss, who I still get like tremors thinking about her because she was damn scary. Oof, man. But that woman taught me front of house service. She taught me what like true service looks like. The cocaine problem is something we won't talk about. But eventually, I think I realized that like working in restaurants was probably not my cup of tea. I moved over to a bakery and started working there. And the morning shifts were much more my speed. Quiet, simple morning shifts, me in the oven. So yeah.
That's quite a shift, right? Like, from farms to suddenly baking. How did that happen? I mean, have you always been interested in cooking or?
Yeah. I mean, well, I would say that growing up, the limit of my baking was, the once a year that mom and I made like an Easter bunny or something. Like, I didn't necessarily grow up intensely baking. But when I got to college at Pomona, we had really interesting work study programs. And initially the Bombay brat in me was like, Mom, I don't need a job. I just want to focus on school. And I really props to her where she was like, actually, you kind of need to get a job. Like, we're going to pay for X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And on top of that, like, go. And it was a little bit of the kick in the pants that I needed of like, oh, I better go find a job. And I had a senior in college who was really encouraging and who said, if you're going to get a job on campus, yeah, sure, you could go get a job at the gym where you just sit there and do your homework and sign people in. But why not get an interesting job? Like, there are genuinely very interesting jobs available. So I was like, okay, what? And she said, well, you could work on the on-campus farm. And so I worked on the on-campus farm actually my whole duration at college. And then she said, there's also this coffee house that is trying to essentially be like a sober, non-alcoholic event during the week for kids that don't want to drink to go to. And they need bakers for the coffee house. And I was like, okay, but I don't really know how to bake. And she was like, you can bake whatever you want. Yeah, just bake anything. And the guy basically would just give me a budget and a wholesale ordering sheet and say, whatever you want to bake, you put on this sheet and you bake.
I am not taking notes from you on this.
So, I mean, I think Pomona just gave us a lot of freedom to experiment and discover parts of ourselves with responsibility, right? Like with guide rails and responsibility. So 2 years into that, I had 2 years of coffee house baking experience, and I was feeding about 100 people a night at that coffee house.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
And then I believe you ended up back in college. So when did that realization hit and how?
Honestly, 9 months in New York was very hard. And I was like, wait,
New York's this pipe dream that everyone has, right? Like if I can make it in New York, and you're like singing this to yourself and you're like, yeah, it's not really that easy.
I didn't make it in New York is the answer to that. Like I tucked my tail between my legs and I went back to college where they feed you 3 meals a day and teachers like help you with your homework. I think I just went into my time in New York saying, I'm going to get every food industry job and I'm going to network with everybody because I want to understand this industry. And I did that. And I feel like even now, my connections that I made as a 19-year-old in New York a decade ago, like really hold me in good stead. And my mentors still show up for me there. But I realized that now I could take everything I had learned working in the industry and actually apply it in school and go deep with it. So I remember calling the dean to say, actually, Vapas aana hai, I want to come back. And she was like, why? What do you want to do now? You were so confident when you left. And I said that I want to start a food magazine where back then Lucky Peach was really, really big, which was the magazine attached to Momofuku. But I did find it, and God bless Lucky Peach, but I did also find it very masculine, very focused on like chef culture. And I felt like there was room to tell. So this hunch was there, I think, as a 19-year-old, that I wanted to tell stories about South Asia. I wanted to tell stories about where we come from. I wanted it to go pretty deep into stories of culture, regionality, specificity, and it'd be a little gentle. Like I didn't want the like macho chef, kitchen, burns, all of that. Like the very Anthony Bourdain New York that I felt like I was experiencing. I wanted like gentle farming content, and to use that as a way to be curious and to ask questions and learn more. So I went back being like, I'm going to start a food conference at college, and I'm going to use the college's budget to do that. And that way, anybody that I couldn't network with in New York, I will network with at college. And
this is the Claremont Food Justice Summit.
Yes. Wow, you really did your homework.
No.
So I started this summit. Eventually just started getting called Food Week because, Claremont Food Justice Summit is a bit of a mouthful. So we just called it Food Week.
What's behind the name? Is Claremont where college was?
Yeah. So there's these 5 colleges. I went to one of them. They're all in Claremont. So Claremont ban gaya.
And why food justice?
Yeah, I think it was because and that wasn't a term that was being used then very much. And I think it became Food Week quickly because it was a bit too serious of a term where people were like, but khana milega ki nahi? But food justice, I think, because there was a realization that people wanted to make the food system better. And by better, I mean that, people wanted to source better produce. People wanted farm workers to be paid better, or farmers to be paid better to begin with, or that there was, a deep racism in the American food industry and in the agricultural movement where, at least in California, all food is harvested by undocumented Mexican and Guatemalan and Belizean labor. But then the same farmers who hire this labor are like very pro deporting all of these folks. And I'm like, politics are not making sense. So food justice is sort of an umbrella term for all the most idealistic, hopeful ways that we could make the food system equitable and fair. And thinking about it from as many lenses as possible, like thinking about it from the lens of, should we be vegetarian? What are GMOs? Is that a silly thing or a serious thing? Like, it was just trying to put a lot of things under one umbrella and eventually realizing that actually the justice word scared people off. And so using the simplicity of food as a way to get people involved with actually very complicated concepts that just became my strategy across the board. And I feel like that's exactly what I've done, a decade later with my company of like using spices and saying, oh, it's just turmeric. It's so yellow and cute, as a way to then tell much more complicated stories and do much more important work.
That sounds like a pretty intense thing to take on as a college student. I mean, I don't know. I remember my college years, I think, were one big blur of alcohol. And I really kind of applaud that you were thinking about these things, at that age and actually not just thinking about it, but acting on it, and that is sort of, I think, probably what's led to your entrepreneurial side as well. But, even when you sort of going back to that period when you said you took a break and you just networked the hell out of New York, in that food space, tell me a little more about that, because it's not easy to sort of cold call and cold email people and, dealing with sort of being ignored and rejection and whatnot. So what is it that got you out of bed then? I mean, today I know it's very different as an entrepreneur. You'll do anything for your business, but what is it that kind of was driving you at that point?
I love people. I love getting to know what people are doing and who they are. But I think as a 19-year-old in New York, what I realized is if I showed up to people, so the person I'm thinking of is Annie Novak, who's one of my mentors, and she ran this urban farm called Eagle Street Rooftop Farm. And what I really did is I showed up to her with like this little bit of a glint in my eye, very young, very bubbly and idealistic, and just kind of presented myself to her and said, how can I be of service to you? I'll ask you questions later. First, what do you need from me? How can I help you? And obviously a 19-year-old is not that helpful, but like you can be put to work, right? And I think that's always been the lesson is like when I was cold calling people, I was also saying, I'll take a beautiful portrait of you, or like, can I take some photos for you? Like, what can I give you, even though I have very little to give, to be useful? Do you need me? Like, I think when I first emailed Annie, I was like, I'm happy to just weed your beds for you. Like, is that helpful? And she was like, who are you? What is wrong with you? So I feel like I wasn't doing the, hey, can I take you out to coffee and like waste 30 minutes of your time waffling about my future, which I get those emails all the time and I understand the impetus, but like, I don't have 30 minutes.
Yeah.
None of us do. So instead it was you're already giving a talk here. I'll come there. Can I buy you a drink after? Or you're going here. Can I? So it was just making ways to be useful to them or get into their line of sight. And then asking one mentor for an intro to the other and say, I'm happy to, do something for her if you introduce me. And I think that's like a front of house tactic, right? Like you're useful front of house in a restaurant if you just start cleaning tables immediately, right? Not if you stand around waiting for your manager to tell you what to do. So I think it was just using some of that scrappiness and realizing that all of these people knew each other, quickly seeing the web in my head of like, actually the person who runs this bakery is friends with the person who runs this farm, who orders from this one. And therefore, by also a little bit of name dropping each person, you can get through the web and understand the network.
Yeah, I think this is such an important life skill, honestly, that everyone needs to adopt. And I totally agree with you that, just sending people emails and saying like, I need an hour of your time. It's like, time is money these days. And, it's not that straightforward. And I go through that sometimes. I'm like, am I being a bitch? Sorry, because I'm not giving people, my time. But that's not, it's not. So I think that's amazing that you had the sort of foresight to think about it differently, where you can offer something as well and just making connections. So, and also I think that, learning that what's the worst thing, right? Someone will just say, no, I don't have the time, or and that's not a bad thing. It's okay.
I guess the last thing I would say, I think there's also a class-based thing that happens here where, I was a 19-year-old working pretty menial service jobs, right? Or like the lowest rung of food jobs. There's an expectation of what that type of person is like. So that's usually a Black or brown lower class person in New York. Instead, there's this entitled, articulate, well-spoken, essentially Bombay rich kid in these positions. So a lot of people were a little disarmed by that. Like, who is she? Where did she come from? Why is she doing this? And that's just because I grew up upper class in Bombay. And, that translates to a New York environment where I just had a lot of one-ups to all the other kids who were doing the same jobs as me.
Yeah. And I think also, I mean, what you said earlier is about sort of being proactive. It's just so important, right? Like you can't sit and wait around for things to happen to you. You have to kind of go after them. I think that's been, from what I've sort of been listening to about your story, that seems to be a common thread across your journey in terms of just reaching out to people and saying, can I come and spend time with you? And hi, basically, yeah. And I will do anything that you need me to do, pretty much. And it's interesting that you talk about photography, because I believe that's kind of got you through the door on multiple occasions. So tell us a little bit about that. After college, when you finally graduated.
Yeah, so I finally graduated by the bloody skin of my teeth, made it out of there.
It sounds like formal education wasn't your beat, but at the same time, you managed to make the most of it, and that's amazing. So that's another thing that I sort of take away from this.
a couple years ago, somebody from HBS, from Harvard Business School, reached out to me as a recruiter, essentially saying, want to apply? Can't guarantee, but like good shot. And I immediately called mom and I was like, Mom, it's HBS. Yeah. Mom was like, Sana, you might survive, but I won't. Okay. So never again. You will not be going to school. I was like, okay, good night. But yeah, I finally graduated. At this point, I had discovered that I was queer, or that I identified as queer. And that wasn't like terminology that I grew up with in Bombay or understood. And I had a lot of fear around it of like, how would I take a girl home? How is that going to happen? Like, I have a very progressive, cool family, but like, I don't know, what will we tell the cook even? How is this going to work? So I followed a girl to the Bay Area. That crashed and burned very quickly, as most young queer relationships tend to. But I ended up in Oakland, where I still live. And I think the only marketable skill I had as an art major who graduated from liberal arts college was that I could photograph. And I reached out to these folks who run the People's Kitchen Collective, who are now some of my best friends. And I had invited them to Food Week. So I networked with them there. I paid them lots of money on Pomona's dime to come give us talks. I think it was the most money anybody had ever paid them to give a speaking event. So they were obsessed with me already. And I said, if I move up to the Bay Area for the summer, can I come volunteer with you guys? And Sita was like, Sita, who's one of their 3 co-founders, said she had a suspicion because she'd seen me with a camera in my hand at the conference. And she was like, why don't you send me a portfolio of your images? So I put together my first like Dropbox portfolio. I didn't know what I was doing. Looking back, it had some pretty ghatia photos in there. And she was like, actually, we are doing like 10 events this summer. If you just come up here, we'll pay you. You'll pay me money? What? And she was like, yeah, we'll actually pay you $300 per event. For a hotshot photographer, that's nothing for me. At like the ripe age of 21, it was magical. And so I like filled up my Subaru with everything I owned and moved up to Oakland just on this one email saying we have 10 events. I was like, 10 events multiplied by $3,000, I will survive. And the People's Kitchen Collective and working as their photographer really just introduced me to the entire Oakland community. Like through them, I met all the organizers, all the cool farmers. Like what they were doing at the time is they were holding these huge events, like sometimes 500 people taking over a street and using the meal to tell a story. So they had this series called From the Farm to the Kitchen to the Table to the Streets, and basically complicating what farm to table means and talking about farm workers, talking about seed sovereignty. And I was getting to photograph all the cool people coming to these dinners, and then basically flirt and network with all of them, which worked out great. I think similarly, I was working at Byright, which is I quickly realized that $3,000 in the Bay Area is not much to live on. So I needed a real full-time job and started working at Byright, which is this very iconic grocery store in SF, on their marketing team. And similarly, I think initially they were like, write a tweet, write some Instagram post. But within a few minutes, they realized, oh, this girl, 1, has a fancy camera. 2, she actually knows how to do this. So let's just put her in charge of photography. And again, through that, it allowed me to connect with all the butchers and all the farmers and like everybody within the Byright network who was essentially supplying the highest end Californian or American food products to this store. I had direct access to, and I could start emailing and being like, hello, do you want your stuff in Byright? Okay, then you should answer some questions from me. And that is, to circle all the way back to the diaspora origin story, talking to buyers in the grocery store, talking to people who had pantry, like companies that were in the pantry section. I started realizing that produce at Byright, or in this magical Californian bubble I was living in, was sourced so beautifully. Like I have dreams about Masumoto peaches or about like Full Belly Farm tomatoes. But then when things were sourced from India, nobody gave a shit where it came from. They would always kind of look at me sort of sheepishly and be like, I guess it comes from India, maybe. And then what really pissed me off was one chef saying, oh, but like everything that comes from India is pretty much organic. Like, look at how fresh it looks. And I was like, India has the largest rate of fertilizer runoff in the world, Mary Jan. Like, what are you saying? But she said it with such confidence in like in a public place. So I just had to shut up and be like, yeah, sure. So I think for me, that's where my interest peaked of, I want to figure out what the South Asian agricultural world looks like. Are they really cool regenerative farmers? Who are they? And then I needed like an in for that. The way that at 19, Bhindi was going to be my in. I was like, what is going to be my in to this world? Because it's so broad, it's so expansive. And 2016 was when, turmeric lattes were exploding.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was like, what is this? Why are people drinking haldi doodh? So yeah, I think that's what led me to be like,
So
maybe yeah.
when you were in Oakland, you kind of started having this idea of what you wanted to do with sort of Indian ingredients in a way, or Indian produce.
I don't even think that it was what I wanted to do. I think it was more realizing what I was curious about. So like it would be generous to say I was forming a business plan at the back of my mind, because I certainly was not. I think it was more that I was thinking, right now, my job, so this like January 2016, my job was to take the most beautiful citrus, like all the varieties of citrus that grow all over California in like basically November through February. There's over 40 varieties of citrus that grow in our peak season then, and tell stories about this citrus. And the story that I wanted to tell was that actually citrus came from China via the Chinese laborers that were working on the railroad. And then Native American folks were basically forced to work in these groves. And that's how citrus became a Californian thing, is like the Chinese laborers. And then
did not know
basically
that.
Yeah. And then basically white people were like, oh, we could use this beautiful fruit as an amazing marketing tactic for California, because California was known as only the gold rush place back then. So they were like, gold is a bit intense. Like there's been a lot of drama around gold. Like, let's market this tiny little fruit and tell people that like, come to California for the golden fruit. So like that complicated story of immigration and people and movement, like that's the story I wanted to tell. Understandably, my bosses looked at me and said, boss, we're a chota sa grocery store. We just want to sell santras. And I had to be like, okay, sorry, okay.
I'm getting a bit intense.
Right, like that's not going to sell santras. So I think it was a curiosity that I want to tell these complicated stories, but how do I do that and where do I do that? And at the time I thought maybe I'm just better off as a photojournalist. Maybe I'll dig into the story of where haldi comes from. And then that'll become, I don't know, like an Instagram series or like I wasn't thinking as we'll start an empire.
So how did you start the empire?
As I think with most good Indian stories, I got conned by an Indian uncle, is I think the story.
I say that about Jay, my husband.
That's how you got conned into starting the table. There's always an Indian uncle. Bonus points if they're Gujarati. But yeah, so what was happening at the time? So Feb 2017, Trump had been elected. And I think as like a young queer immigrant, like it just felt like a slap in the face to what I felt I had known about America. I was like, the people that voted this guy in don't want somebody that looks like me here, especially as I was coming to terms with a queer identity at a time when I actually wasn't doing super great with my family. And that was because I in typical 21-year-old fashion, I came out in the most like dramatic, bad timing, stupid way possible.
I want to know before we talk business.
I think my poor Nani was in the backseat of the car and I just blurted something out to my mother and just was very aggressive with her and didn't give her room to process. Like it was something I had known about myself for 9 years, but my mother's also my closest person in my life. So, what she was just reeling. She was just like, excuse me, what are you saying?
Well, did she not know? I mean,
she had no idea. No. Wow. She didn't see it coming at all. No. I mean, I had dated boys. I have had wonderful boyfriends. I'm dating a boy right now. Like, I very much have like gone in every direction. No, she didn't see it coming. And I think she just got scared. She was like, already this Tikhu Marchu daughter of mine who is insisting on carving her own path and doing what nobody else wants to do. Now she's making her life even harder by saying that she likes women. So there was a lot of fear for her. And I was living my like queer punk life and I was like, I'm so cool and you're so uncool. So I hate you now. So I was very isolated. Trump had gotten elected. I was not happy at my job and I ended up having some health drama. So I basically just sent my parents a very dramatic email in Feb 2017 and said, I want to book a one-way ticket home. Like, I'm not doing great. I just want to come home. And given my 10th standard experience, they were very familiar with their messy daughter coming home and like picking up the pieces of her life. And so I came home with the idea at the back of my head that when I feel better, I will go visit some turmeric farms. But I didn't go home on this mission. I went home realistically just feeling a bit broken and feeling like America had broken me a little bit. And that, trying to make it in the food industry had just proven a bit too hard for me. And I just wanted to live at 4A Brighton and be fed dal chawal for a little while. I think a couple months of that cured me. And eventually I got very bored of dal chawal and realized that, let me do that project. And so I actually wrote to Roads and Kingdoms, which at the time was Anthony Bourdain's food company or like food media project, and said, if I photograph who's growing Gwyneth Paltrow's turmeric lattes, like, will you run the story? And they said, yeah, we'll give you $300 for the story. And now my ticket to India only had been $1,500. And my flight just to Vijayawada, Andhra Pradesh was far more than that.
Please don't complain about $300. It's a lot more than anyone gets paid today to write stories in India. So
fair,
5 years ago.
6 years ago, it was a very different world. But yeah, I started basically contacting haldi farmers that I was finding via the internet, via WhatsApp.
Yeah, I'm like, how do you find haldi farmers? I mean, how do you even find haldi farmers?
You put a 21-year-old bored at home on Google and she will find you some haldi farmers.
Google Zindabad.
Yeah, Google Zindabad. But I did also connect with the Indian Institute of Spices Research, who are in Kozhikode in Kerala, and, just started calling them nonstop, being like, pick up the phone. Nobody ever picked up the phone. Dr. Prasad was always on a chai break. And so finally, I had that $300 number in my head. So I just booked a flight and showed up at ISR. And I think that visit, as soon as I got there, they treated me as though they'd been waiting for me all along. Like, oh, Sana, madam. And they cleared out their afternoon for me. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what? And they were,
you're not someone who takes no for an answer, clearly. So
no, you just go.
Lesson number 2.
But yeah, Dr. Nirmal Babu, who was the director of the ISR at the time, like, was just very kind. And he brought in all his scientists into a room. Like, again, who does that for a 21-year-old who shows up in like a crumpled yellow kurta? And really told me about all the different varieties of haldi, the varieties that they were working on. And I think what they told me is there is farmers that come to them all the time, wanting to do things differently, wanting to not sell to the commodity market, wanting to grow regeneratively or organically. But even if they give them the tools, even if they give them the know-how, they give them the seeds, when it comes time to actually then sell that product to the market, there's no specialty market to sell to, right? Like, there's just the mandi. Mm-hmm. So he was saying that I have like a Rolodex of farmers I could introduce you to who are doing interesting work, but they have nowhere to sell and nobody willing to pay them a premium. And at that point, I was like, okay, basically just matchmake me, like, give me that Rolodex, hand it over, I'll call all of them. And I think that they also said, I think as they were talking about these varieties, I had been Googling so intensely and nowhere was I able to understand true varieties of haldi. Like, I had understood that there was like Salem, Madras, like Erode, but those are trade, and Alleppey. But those are actually just trading hubs and areas. They are not varieties. Like, that's like saying that, any tomato that grows in Oakland is an Oakland tomato. There's so many varieties of tomatoes. So I was realizing that there was this reduction of a variety, and that was actually done by the British. They decided that their favorite places where either they wanted a vacation or there was a trading hub, they would name all the yellow haldis after that place. So I think my storytelling brain was like, oh, they need a market. Maybe I could make it. And I remember getting done with that 2-hour visit to ISR and actually emailing every contact I had in America saying, hypothetically, if I found you really magical haldi, would you buy it? And they were like, I mean, if you can get it to America, yeah, sure.
So where were they getting their haldi for these turmeric lattes until then?
Like distributors, like Chef's Warehouse type places.
No, but like where were they sourcing it? I mean, where's the biggest sort of source of haldi, for example?
That's sort of the thing. Like, I reached out to the guy, John Beaver, who runs Oaktown Spice, which is really like the place where any good chef in the Bay Area is buying spices from Oaktown Spice. They're a great store, the beautiful spice shop. I reached out to John and I was like, boss, where is your haldi coming from? And he was like, quite frankly, I don't have a clue. Like, There's one spice distributor in Chicago. I place an order from him, it arrives. Like, I've built a business and it's a great business, but I don't know where any of my stuff comes from, especially when it's from India. He was like, Vietnam, there's some transparency. Like, other regions, there's a little bit more understanding of where. When it says India on it, I throw my hands up and say, I don't know. So he was saying that if you find something beautiful, tell me and I'll buy it. So it was an immediate understanding that wherever people were buying it from, it was very opaque. There was no quality standards and nobody was able to trace it back. even Michelin-starred chefs, right? Which is quite shocking that Michelin-starred chefs are using essentially McCormick level spices. So that's where it all started for me, is reaching out to a mix of chefs, turmeric latte brands, and spice shops and saying, want better haldi? I might have some. No idea how to export, no idea how to import. Like that was all bad, man. But I just had this hunch of maybe I'll find a farmer.
Wow. And then how on earth did you actually sort of go from finding the farmers to this export? Because that's not an easy process. I mean, I'm not an importer or anything, but I've dealt with enough imports in my life to know that it's pretty painful.
Horrible. I think that's where I have to thank Syed, who's our India operations manager, and he's been with us from day one. That man used to be an accountant. And he now handles.
You're never used to be an accountant. I just want you to know, as an accountant, that once an accountant, always an accountant.
Always an accountant.
A proud accountant.
And now, is handling like multiple containers of shipments every week.
Wow.
So the man is an absolute legend. And I think similar to me, he has such a like jugaad, hustle spirit, and was just like, oh, we don't know how to export. Okay, I'll just go stand at the port until somebody tells me how to do it. And I kind of got his help early on, and he just figured out the process and was like, okay, Sana, now I need you to show up at Spice Board and like give them a hard time. And I was like, okay, I can do that. 3 days at the Spice Board, let's go.
Did you ever use your gender to your advantage, like I have done multiple times?
I would just shame them. Where I would be like, oh, it's embarrassing for you to have a young woman sitting in your waiting room for 3 days. Great, that is what I'll do. Yeah, all the time. I think use whatever tools we have, man. Like it's such a broken system. I also think that, I have played the like young woman card a lot, where if you like make big eyes and ask lots of questions, they may give you answers that otherwise they probably wouldn't have answered. So if you just like ask the really, really basic questions, and you can work your way up to the complicated ones and
it's
suddenly
so
have
funny.
a PhD.
This is something I was listening to Kiran Mazumdar's show talk a couple of weeks ago. And, she started her business at 25. And she was saying the same thing. She said, just go there and ask them. And, everyone like thinks really badly of bureaucrats. But actually, if you sit there and ask them all the questions, they will help you out. Someone will help you out, and you just have to do it. You just have to go put yourself out there. And, and also she said to take full advantage of every law that's there that sort of helps women in some way. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we found all of these like export schemes and all kinds of things. And we had like a little folder that was all of our schemes folder, where we're like, okay, so we're going to get a refund on this and this and this. And we have gotten every single refund.
Amazing.
So I think it was, to backtrack to how we actually found the farmer and the farmers. I visited maybe like 40 turmeric farmers, which was a ridiculous adventure. And I was like, what am I doing?
And are they like all over the country, or is it something
Yes, like Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Kerala, Karnataka, like all over. But what else was I doing? Nothing. So might as well. And I realized that I really enjoyed, like, I think at that point when I was doing that first round of sourcing, I could have been like, not my cup of tea, right? Because I feel like I worked in restaurants for 5 minutes, was like, not my cup of tea, can't do this. Too intense. Like, I'm an intense enough person. You put me in such an intense environment, it's like basically a pressure cooker. Whereas the work of sourcing and being on farm, especially because I had real agriculture experience of 6 years, like I had worked on real farms, which I guess, as an urban woman showing up in a jumpsuit onto a farm in Karnataka and understanding exactly their farming methods and being able to kind of nerd out with them about agriculture was probably a very disarming tactic, because initially these farmers would look at me and be like, who is she? What is she? And then, we'd start talking about mulching or about like, their irrigation models. And suddenly they were like, oh, she's actually one of us. Like, she's a nerd too. Cool. And through all of these visits, I found Mr. Prabhu Kasaraneni, who is still our turmeric farmer, and he grows our Pragati turmeric for us outside Vijayawada, Andhra Pradesh. And one of the first things he said to me was, ma'am, if you don't care about how I take care of my soil, I won't sell to you. Take all my money, take it all. And I think I bought my first batch was just 20 kgs. Then we worked up to 350 kgs. So it was like that 20 kgs, we were like, will it make it to America? I don't know. It did. And then the 350 kgs made it. And there's actually a great photo of me. I took my friend's like 1980s manual pickup truck to the airport to SFO. And a friend was in the front seat with me. And I was like, I don't even know if they're going to clear this shipment, because I don't even know if I have all the documents to be an importer, but we're going to try. And then they cleared it, but then there was 3 pallets and I had to somehow get those pallets into this pickup truck. And I didn't have a pallet jack or know how to like operate a forklift or any of these things. So we simply just cut open the pallet, like all the saran wrap, and started physically moving 50-pound bags into the truck. And the learning how to move pallets was a very quick learning for me. So that was sort of the beginning. And I think that the lucky thing was that the American community that we developed early on was very excited about this thing, like probably more excited than I was.
But I think, and from what I've been following about Diaspora is, and I obviously want to talk about the name, but a big, big part of it is the storytelling, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there is product and there's product, but I think storytelling is so integral. And, it's not, I see that in my business as well, right? Like in whatever we're doing. And I hear this so much from people that people want to hear stories. What was that? How did you kind of play that into your brand and what you've built?
I think that was the fun part for me, right? Like I'm an art major. I'm not a businesswoman. Well, now I am a businesswoman, but I was not a businesswoman. And I wanted to basically, that same curiosity that I had of like, where does haldi come from? And who grows it? And who are they? And what did they care about? What did they eat? Like that was my line of questioning. It was a very like bright-eyed line of questioning, right? I think my hunch when I started the company was customers have the same questions and customers have the same curiosity that we do or that I do. It's not this like niche, nerdy thing. It's actually how we want to be spoken to as consumers. We want to be spoken to like we're smart, not like we're dum-dums. And I just felt like so much of what I was seeing in the market was greenwashing and just, I would go into the grocery store and even me who had such an insider understanding of all of those companies could be like scammed all the time into buying the wrong type of eggs or to buying the wrong type of fish because of the words used. So from the beginning, I wanted to be like, we're going to tell you a story and we're going to tell you a deep, complicated story. Why? Because it's interesting, but also because we wanted to build trust in a way that nothing else in the grocery store is building. And I mean, when you look at the spice trade and the history of the spice trade and the fact that it was, really run by colonizers for 200 years and they built the system that then Gujarati traders took over, my people, hello. That was also built on lies, essentially, and opacity and not telling the truth. Like often when they were marketing pepper in England, they would say that pepper was actually stolen from the nests of these like vipers. And like the traders had to like brave like deadly vipers in order to access the little eggs.
Different kind of storytelling, it sounds like.
Total bullshit storytelling. And so much of like spice storytelling, the more I've dug into it, is bullshit. Like, what is Malabar pepper? It's pepper that is big, simple. But if you ask, a fancy American chef, what is Malabar peppercorn? It's like, oh, the bold, smoky notes of Malabar peppercorn. Like, that's rubbish.
Interesting. And tell us about the name Diaspora. Where did you come up with that?
Yeah, I wish I had a better story for it. But essentially in college, suddenly you go from being, I knew what I was a South Bombay girl, I was very clear in my identity. But then I went to America and suddenly I felt like I wasn't from here and I wasn't from there. And I felt very complicated. And all the international students had the same feeling. We were all feeling very angsty about our identities. And so we coined this term diasporic angst of like this feeling of feeling neither here nor there. And suddenly feeling like we were growing in ways that, our families didn't understand because we were having this Western experience. So I had always joked that like if I ever had a cafe, because at the time I thought that, having my own cafe was the dream, I would call it diasporic angst. And it would be the food that we consumed when we were angsty. I think when it came to starting a spice company, I realized that word was a bit of a mouthful. But it was really about capturing this feeling of like not being from here or there. And, that feeling of moving and suddenly becoming an immigrant. And in 2016 and 17, I think, Indian American identity, and I don't identify as Indian American, but Indian American identity was still not really the like shiny thing that it is now. Now there's like all the TV shows and everybody in these positions of power. Like the Indian American like pop culture experience has come a very long way in these past 6 years. Back then it was pretty uncool. It was like connotations of Patel brothers in New Jersey. And I think there was also a meanness around it of like, are you authentic or am I, like who's real Indian? There was just a lot of snarkiness to those conversations. And I wanted to be like, maybe we can all be friends, guys.
Yeah.
Like maybe we could all just be nice to each other and celebrate Diwali. Well, what about that? So there was this wanting to create community and not feel alone. And a lot of that came from, feeling alone in America. Like I left, and moved back to Bombay in 2017 because I just felt lonely. And so when I was coming back with this plan and this business idea, I was like, I'm doing it to not feel lonely, basically, to feel like I'm part of something. And I think it does feel amazing 5 years later to feel like, one, I just have such a solid place in this industry and I know exactly who my friends are, and who my peers are, and who my community is. But then we also have this community now of like 200,000 customers who like just subscribe to the same values as us and who care really deeply about our farm partners. And so, 5 years in, I feel the very opposite of alone. And that feels really, really cool.
So what were the last 2 years like for you during COVID? I mean, was it good, bad, ugly?
Ooh, yeah. I was having a one-on-one with one of my managers yesterday. And she's one of my oldest employees. She's been with us since June 2020. So for some context, I launched the company August 29th, 2017. And until early January 2020, it was essentially a one-woman show. Yes, we were growing very quickly based on the internet. We had lots of flashy press and all of that. But and I can share numbers. I think we ended 2019 at like 400K in revenue, which sure, that's a decent number, but it's not big. That's not like a large business. So I wasn't paying myself a salary. Everything was just going back into buying more haldi. But Jan 2020, I visited all these farms. I kind of had this plan for what basically all the new spices I wanted to add on, but I had no money to buy them. I just visited the farmers, said, when I have money, I'll come back. And then the pandemic hit. And I thought I was in Bombay, actually got COVID, and then healed from COVID and snuck my way out of India by sheer jugaad and came back to California. I got here and thought I was just going to have to wrap the business up and shut down. I had no spices, nothing in stock, and everything was shut down. But I applied. Somebody in my CEO community told me to apply for an economic impact disaster loan, which is like an SBA loan. They're called idle loans. So I applied for the idle loan. I think I was just sitting at my desk one day, completely lukha, and I was like, why not? I kid you not, 2 weeks later, I had $100,000 sitting in my bank account from idle. And I was just like, what is going on? What?
That's crazy.
God, so
this is the American dream, though, I have to say. I mean, this is the kind of thing that, very few people got access to those. I have so many business friends who never got access to those. And I know we're so lucky compared to India. And I know you've talked so much about this, that American businesses, especially small businesses, we got help. We had a lot of help. I know that Indian small businesses got absolutely nothing. But I also know that I was very lucky because I had basically a wealthy white friend who told me about this. And later on, what I realized is that Black and brown business owners got it at a 1 to 10 rate, whereas white business owners got it at an 8 out of 10 rate. So, there was a lot of issues with it. And I was very lucky and had resources to get access to that. But man, I took that 100K, and every farmer that I had done a darshan with in January, I basically just wire transferred and said, de do, and said, whenever it's ready, whenever you can get it to me. And I was like, Syed, whenever you can get it out of Bombay, I'll take it. Because it was 100K that I wasn't expecting. So I didn't care. And also I got very, very lucky in that people were suddenly sitting at home. Yeah.
And they wanted to order things on the internet and feel less
alone. And they were cooking,
right?
They were cooking at home. Yeah.
Suddenly people were like sourdough, okay, or banana bread. And I was like, you need spices for banana bread. So suddenly the cute pink boxes of spices that we were in small quantities shipping across the country were the hottest item out there. And, suddenly I was seeing 10,000 orders rushing in and I didn't know what to do with myself. And so Dina was my intern that I hired fresh out of college, who quickly became production and warehouse manager because I was like, just handle it.
You got promoted.
Yeah, very quickly she got promoted. But so 2020, we grew 6x.
Wow.
Which is fairly wild for a 2.5 person operation. And then 2021, we grew another 3 or 4x. So, just astonishing numbers to hit. This year has not been that, but that's okay. And we're taking it as it comes. But something that Dina and I were talking about in our manager meeting yesterday was that so much of our business is about holiday gifting. So about Q4. October to December. Horrible
It's
time
coming
of
up,
year.
baby.
Yep, I'm in it. And 2020, our warehouse basically threw up their hands in the air and said, not possible. We can't do it. It's too hard because we needed to get out 700 orders a day.
Ooh.
So Dina, and it's an open warehouse on Treasure Island, freezing, very cold. And we were like, okay, I guess we have to do it. So my partner at the time was a rugby player, pretty professional rugby player. And so we basically hired the entire USA women's rugby team to come pack every single order known to mankind and trained them in 2 days on one weekend. And to this day, I have like rugby players come up to me, be like, you put my wife through grad school. And I'm like,
oh,
thank you.
amazing.
I tried. So it was crazy to suddenly hire 10 people, 10 hatta katta rugby players to send out, I think it was like 15,000 orders in 3 weeks.
Wow.
But it was also traumatic. I was tired for months after, like I think back and I'm like, why didn't Dina quit? Because we were working full day office shifts and then full night shifts at the warehouse. I have no idea where that energy came from. I don't have that energy anymore. I would not do that. And then 2021, a very similar thing happened. And Dina and Rosie had to fly at this point to Kentucky, where our warehouse had moved to pack 5,000 orders in 5 days. So we've just had, it's been an incredible 2 years. I feel very lucky, blah, blah, blah. But it's also been so hard and I'm so tired. And I'm kind of going into this holiday season with all these new people. We're now a team of 15. We have 5 in India and 10 here. And we have all these new chirpy employees being like, oh my God, Q4, yay. And I'm like, yeah, no.
I think I remember our COVID days and how it was such a hustle to suddenly get into delivery, right? From being fine dining restaurant to going into delivery mode. And I think it's just that it's like you do what it takes, right? You are in survival mode and you just got to do what you got to do. But it sounds like it's been an amazing story. And I know you've grown from doing just haldi, like you said, to so many other spices, and you're going to keep adding. So what's next for you guys?
Yeah. So we went from one spice, haldi, and then I think until 2020, the end of 2020, we had 7 spices. And those 7 spices literally took me 3 years to source. And my rule was simply, if there's something better that already exists on the market, we won't source it.
Sure.
I'm only going to source if it's going to be the best thing on the market to exist.
But speaking of sourcing, sorry to cut you off, but
no.
Aren't there other people who are just like, well, I'm going to go and source there, and it's not like you're processing it beyond a point. You're selling the raw ingredients. So how have you handled that?
All of our farm partners get calls from all of our competitors. We're like, hi, can we buy? And I think the magical thing is that we're paying more than anybody else on the market, right? We know that. Our biggest competitor, I was poring over some of their numbers from one of their documents recently. And my director of strategy and I were just kind of laughing because we were like, these numbers that they're what they're paying farmers is pitiful, but they use the same language and words as us. And I think we calculated and we're paying 5x more than them. If we had venture capital investors, they would be like, cut your costs immediately, but we don't, so we can do whatever the hell we want, and we will. But I think ultimately, up until the end of this year, I have spent 4 to 6 months in India every year building this company. So I've visited every single farm we've ever sourced from. I show up, I spend days with them, we talk to them. And we also make ourselves available to them. You don't have milling equipment, you want a mill, we'll front you the money for a mill. So there is a very we're investing in a long-term relationship.
Yeah, it's an investment. It's exactly, yeah.
And I think we're also partnering with really wonderful values-aligned farmers. I found people in India who often tell me, oh, I've had so many farmers rip me off. And I honestly look at them.
I was just going to ask, have you ever had a bad experience though?
We've had one with Jeera, one. And we work with 200 farmers across India. So sure, we've had hiccups, we've had things go wrong or quality control wasn't done to our standards, but it's always okay, there's an issue. We got to pull it off the shelves immediately. What are you going to do to make it right? And we've always had our farm partners say, we'll comp the next batch. We'll just give you another 100 kgs completely free to fix it, because they want the relationship. You want a relationship where you're being paid 6 times the market price, right?
Yeah. No, this is so important, tell this, because I think there tends to be a slightly bad reputation with India, and it's just not the case, right? Not everyone's out to make a quick buck or rip you off. And I think it's amazing that you can say with such confidence and obviously experience that you've had a good run.
Yeah. And so I think, we were sourcing, and now we're up to 30 spices from 200 farms, which feels pretty wild. So we did this big jump from 7 to 24, and then from 24 to 30, and we're done. We are not sourcing more spices.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Well, I think we're realizing that, sure, I could source this like really niche, tiny thing from somewhere that, 40 people will buy. But like, I'd rather go deep with our existing farmers, and I'd rather buy more and more from them, help them grow their businesses. Like, that's my responsibility a little bit more than, oh, here's another cool thing that I can buy 20 kgs of. So we're going deep rather than going wide. And then we're also realizing that like the market for like individual spices, like just a haldi or just a fennel or just a pepper is there. But what people really want is masalas. What they really want is like, how can I take this thing and use it in my cooking immediately without having to think about, the ratio and how many teaspoons and all that? We launched our chai masala last October, and it has become our best-selling like product by a lot. Like by a lot. And, and the problem with the chai masala is literally that, so we're the only chai masala in the US that uses cardamom as the main ingredient by over 30%. Like it's primarily elaichi, and elaichi is really expensive. It's 5,000 rupees a kg.
Wow.
That's what we're paying for our elaichi. Like that's the price we pay to the farmer for that elaichi. So the math is kind of bonkers. And we also only have limited elaichi that meets our quality standards. And so we only work with these 2 farms. We buy everything that they grow. And that's meant that even though chai is our best-selling product, I can't make humanly more chai or enough chai to keep up with the demand. Like people are like, why are you always out of stock? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. But
grow so fast. Yeah.
This point of like paying what seems like a premium for a quality product is something that I've harped on forever. And, people have always said, oh, the table's so expensive. And I'm like, well, it's not just expensive because we feel like charging, ripping people off. It's because it does come at a price when quality comes at a price, and it's so worth it. So it's, and I think people are beginning to understand that. So my next question is, when are you coming to India? Because I think that there's sort of room for what you're doing in India too. I don't think there are people who are sort of talking about, the sauce. And I was actually, my last episode was with Chef Thomas, and, he's got the locavore, and it was exactly this. He was like, when he was telling me about it, I was just like, why has this not happened before, right? Like, why are people not talking about the source of what we're consuming from our own backyard? So any plans for India?
So we're moving all of our production to India just now. So currently we've actually been like taking the raw material from India and packing it in the US. And that was a COVID thing. That was like it's just easier to do it this way, right? Not like it's cheaper or it's better. So my next priority is, the magic of being an import-export company is we can pay really good wages in India and pay people really well and build really solid jobs because we're dealing with dollars. So step 1 is just move production to India. I think once that happens, we can definitely think through how to launch in India and if that's viable. I mean, something that I've struggled, I think emotionally, I hate the thought that we don't sell in India. I hate that we're taking what is most delicious and beautiful out of the country to the West instead of it being consumed domestically. It's why I love the tables and the subcos and all of these domestic brands that we have that are doing things for us and by us. That being said, I think what I've thought through a lot is that who buys spices at the end of the day? Coffee has become this like niche thing that, like, for example, my dad buys his own coffee and then makes it for himself every afternoon. It's like a special thing that this man does who otherwise never goes into the kitchen. So he can be in charge of the purchasing of it. But when it comes to most upper class Indian homes, who's buying the masala? Who's buying the spices? It's your cook, it's your help. And they don't have the purchasing power to say, madam, I spent, 700 rupees on haldi instead of 120 rupees because it's, single origin. So I'm not really sure about the like market size of being able to launch in India and whether it's the smartest move for us, especially because the global market is just so big and we have like barely scratched the surface. We currently sell on one channel, direct to consumer on our website. We're not on Amazon. We're in maybe 100 stores. Like we're a single channel business that is now about to become an omni-channel business and launch in grocery and launch on Amazon, do all these things. So like the scope is just huge.
I can understand that. And, I mean, while I selfishly wait for you to launch in India, I completely get that from a business perspective.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears now, Sana, to a very sort of quick, fun, rapid fire, non-work talk kind of thing. But it is obviously food related because that's me and it happens to be you too. So what's your go-to comfort food?
Oh, easy. Tofu stew, sundubu jjigae, which is like delicious Korean food.
That's very specific. I thought you were going to say like Kajri or some Gujarati.
No. I make it like twice a week.
Wow. Interesting. A great book you've read in the recent past or a podcast you've heard.
Ooh, good book. There's a book called America is Not the Heart. And it's like about a Filipino woman moving to America. I feel like the immigrant fiction genre is my happy place. So America is Not the Heart.
I love your bookshelf behind you, by the way. And I love the color coordination.
Somewhere here.
Yeah. What's the best investment you've made in your journey?
Ooh, hiring out really smart people for all the shit that I'm not good at and realizing what I'm not good at very quickly and realizing that I'd rather pay somebody else more money than I would ever pay myself because they're better at it.
Very smart business decision for sure. Who've been your role models or mentors? I know you've talked a lot about many people, but...
Yeah, I think a role model is very easy. It's Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia. That man has built, the business model for sustainability and equity. I think in terms of mentors, I've had a lot, but recently I just put together my board. So I have a 3-person board. I know,
we were talking about this before we started recording and I'm like amazed, that is one of the hardest things to do. And that's incredible that in 5 years, you've got a board. So how did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, I started working with a business coach in 2020 and it's funny because I was paying him a lot of money because he's a very big deal and a business coach. And it was at a time when I wasn't making a salary off the company, but I was investing in him, which go me, I'm glad I made that decision. And he and I have now been working together since then. He's the chair of the Haas School of Business at Berkeley, but he also ran one of really America's first premier tea companies called Republic of Tea. And so we meet every single week. And the initial first year of sessions with him were really hard. Like the man would give me a D-, not really, but like kind of like give me a D- on my business skills and homework every week. And now, we have a real friendship and a really beautiful relationship, but he was really pushing me. He's like, build a board, figure out who you want to be on your board. And I started reaching out to people earlier this year when we knew we were going to raise our first round of investment. Ellen Bennett, who runs Headley and Bennett, was one of the first. She's that woman, like incredible. She was one of the first women who sat down with me. She made me go to a spinning class with her because that was the only time she had from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. I'm half dying on that cycle while she's shouting questions at me. And then she had 15 minutes for coffee after. But that was maybe the most inspirational 15 minutes of my life. Like the woman just like charged me up. So I knew that like if I could get her on board, I wanted her on board. And sure enough, like she just brings energy and branding expertise and like real smarts to the board. And then there's Franco Fubini, who runs Natura. Natura to me is like the most beautifully sourced global produce. And they're really big in Europe, really big on the East Coast. They're not in California yet. But like every good restaurant in Europe or in New York is sourcing produce from them. And it's like diaspora level spices, but for mangoes and peaches and all of that. And he's built, $100 million business from scratch with very like fully profitable. So that's my 3-person board and they are incredible and just so helpful to me. So it's them.
Amazing. What's your definition of success?
Oh, right now it's to be able to sleep at night, like sleep aaram se at night without taking a melatonin, without needing a weed gummy, just calmly go to bed.
I love that.
That's where I'm at right now.
And most importantly, what's your message to startup entrepreneurs? I know there've been like a conversation's been pouring with lessons, but if you kind of had to pick one message.
I think there's 2. One is have focus. I see so many startup entrepreneurs like going, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do this. And it's like, just do one thing. Like I have had the product roadmap for Diaspora since 2017. And it's been like just chugging towards that, not getting distracted. Obviously, if it's not working, change it. But I could have gotten distracted by 40 other things at 40 different points. And it just was about sticking to the track. And I think the other one, and then I say this one all the time, is like know your power, is right now, as a 29-year-old or 28-year-old, almost 29, I know that I'm quite a powerful person, and I hold a lot of power right now in the industry, in my job, in my position. But as a 23-year-old, the world wants to tell you that you don't have power and that you're just a silly little girl. And instead, I think I just had this hunch that like what I want to do matters and is valuable, and I'm going to show them. And that made me powerful even then, and it made me very threatening to other people even then, because I had such clarity and I had so much confidence and ambition. So obviously don't be an asshole, don't be cocky, but like, especially for women, I think, know your power and like hold on to it. We're powerful.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't have ended on a better note. And all I want to say is more power to you for everything you have lined up, and everything you're going to build Diaspora to. And I'm so excited for you. And I can't wait to hear more and follow what's happening. So good luck.
Thank you. I feel like you led the way also.
Thank you. After recording this episode, I happened to meet a chef who is visiting Mumbai from Singapore, and I mentioned I had just recorded with Sana. I had barely begun to narrate her story about her brand when he was like, "Wait, I've seen her on the cover of a magazine recently." And he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of Sana on the cover of Cherry Bomb. How amazing is that? But also, how not surprising, considering the amazing story we've all just heard, and of course, the empire that Sana has built with Diaspora. I really hope you enjoyed tuning in today. And remember that you'll never know if you don't ask. I hope you enjoyed tuning in today. Do catch the earlier episodes when you get a chance. And more importantly, I would love to hear from you with your thoughts on the show. You can find me on Instagram at Gauri Devidayal, or on Twitter at Gauri Details, or LinkedIn. Either way, sit back and relax, because this round is on me.